angle. So what I'd like for you to do is, in Pear Deck, draw that angle arc, draw an arrow over to opposite. And I'd love it if you color coded it in red. So pretend you're standing on that reference angle, that 38, you're shining a flashlight or you're looking straight across to the other side of the triangle. That's the opposite. We label that with an O. The hypotenuse is the easiest one, right? We've got a right angle, and opposite that right angle is always the hypotenuse. We label that H. The adjacent is the one that's sometimes hard to identify. It's like you're making a hard turn, either to the right or to the left. The adjacent side is always a leg. It's never the hypotenuse. So if you label the opposite side, that's usually really easy. Label the hypotenuse, that's usually really easy. And then the adjacent is the other one. It's always a leg. It's never the hypotenuse, okay? So our whole goal for today is to label triangles H, O, and A. H is hypotenuse, O is opposite, and A is adjacent. And it's all based on that reference angle. Okay, and remember the reference angle is never, ever, ever the 90-degree angle. Never the 90-degree angle. It's always one of the acute angles. So if we look over on this other side, let's see if we can make some sense of that. I'm going to blow mine up so we can see it a little bit better. If we look at the angle with the 29 in it, triangle with a 29 in it, what's the opposite side? Somebody put it in the chat or unmute yourself. It's the O. The 17, absolutely. So if we draw an arrow from the 29 to the opposite side, that's the O. What's the H? Is it marked? That's right. So the H isn't marked. The H doesn't have any variable in it. It's opposite that right angle. So the hypotenuse is always the longest side. It's always opposite the right angle. It's what we would make C in the Pythagorean theorem. And then we're going to make a hard left turn, and that's the A. So the A is the side with the X on it. So let's try the next one. What's the 10? Is that the O, the A, or the H? The 10. H. That's the hypotenuse. And what's the X? Which leaves this other side to be the, you're right, that is the O. Oh no, the A, right? I marked that wrong. This is the O because it's opposite. So if I go from the 57 to the opposite side, that's going to be the O. It's not, so the triangles can be rotated and flipped around in space. So it's not always one side or another. Like it's not always the top of the triangle, the bottom of the triangle. It's always relative to that angle. So if I start at the 24 and I look to the opposite side, that's the O. If I start at the 60 and I go to the opposite side, that's the O. If I start at the right angle and I go to the opposite side, that's always the H. If I start at the right angle and I go to the opposite side, that's always the H. And then the other angle is always the A. Or the other side is always the A. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's practice that. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. And I want you to go do slide 2 on the Pear Deck. And then we're going to compare answers and see if we agree. So everybody should be on slide 2. Label all of the opposite sides with an O. Label all of the hypotenuse with an H. And label the other side with an A. I'm going to stop sharing so that you can go back to yours. And then the directions change a little bit on slide 5. So when you get to slide 5, pause there for a minute. See if you can do it following the directions, but the directions do change on slide 5. I'm so impressed, y'all. Remember, we're labeling sides, not angles. So when you go to the opposite side, you're going from the angle to the opposite side. And if you're just trying the arrows, that's okay. As long as they're color-coded, I get it. Practice writing the O, the A, and the H, though, because you really want to make sure you're doing that on sides. So if you're just drawing arrows and not marking O, A, and H, you might confuse yourself later on if you're not marking those. Because we're going to ultimately make ratios out of these sides, and you're going to need to know what number goes on the numerator and what goes in the denominator. Nice. Nice. So I'm going to take over your screen again. I'm going to share my slide 4 just to make sure we all have the same answers here. I've got the hypotenuse. That's a side. I've got the hypotenuse. That's a side. Got a hypotenuse. That's a side. The hypotenuse. That's a side. Make sure you're labeling the sides. Some people, it kind of looks like you're labeling angles. Then we go to the opposite. So that's the O. Opposite. That's the O. Opposite. That's the O. I don't like skinny triangles. And then the other side that we haven't marked yet, that's always the A. So label your hypotenuse, label your opposite side, and then label your A. I would like everybody to meet me on slide 5, regardless of where you personally are. We want to talk about making ratios. So let me zoom in just a little bit. Oh, maybe. We're going to talk about making ratios. So in trig, there are 3 ratios that we can make: sine, cosine, and tangent, and they have very specific patterns. So that's kind of what we're practicing here. I want you to make a ratio with the O and the A. What's the O, the 9 or the 20? The 9. So the 9 is the O, and that means the A is the 20. We're going to make a ratio with that, and then grab your calculator or open Desmos. What is 9 divided by 20 as a decimal? Anybody? 9 divided by 20 is a decimal. 0.45. Perfect. 0.45. This is going to be important for next week, okay? So I know Thanksgiving is tomorrow, and we're going to have a long weekend. I hope everybody celebrates with family and doesn't really think about math unless they absolutely have to. But I need you to hold on to this until Tuesday, okay? So opposite, adjacent, we make a ratio and reduce it to a fraction. So what about the next one? Let's go down. What's the O here? The 13 or the 18? The 13. So that's the O. It's going to go in the numerator. And then the 18 is the adjacent because it's right next door. If you need to label the H, go ahead and label that H, okay? Because then you can have the O, you have the H, and then you know exactly what the A is. I'm a crazy person. I needed to put 13 there. What is 13 divided by 18? Anybody? 13 divided by? 0.722. Yes. Repeating? Nice. I'm going to stop sharing. I want you, if you haven't done it already, to do the last 2.